Hey, welcome to How It's Done, a podcast for curious marketers. I'm Kriste Goad. I'll be your host, and I'm really glad you're here. Today, we're talking with journalist Kathryn Rickmeyer, founder of 10beat. I'm super excited to dig into the topic of what makes for a good story. And for my fellow PR and media relations folks out there, what makes for a good pitch. But first, a little about Kathryn. Some people call her Kathryn, others call her the headline hunter. Because if there's a story, she'll break it. She's broken stories on everything from meth-fueled attack squirrels to new Amtrak lines. Kathryn got her start in the news industry as a television news producer for an NBC affiliate in Huntsville, Alabama. After moving to Nashville, she quickly made a name for herself as a reporter for the Nashville Post and the Nashville Scene. Her articles have been cited in The Guardian, NBC, CoinDesk, and numerous other national and international news outlets. Last year, Kathryn launched 10beat, a statewide online news outlet covering technology, business, and commercial real estate. 10beat has broken stories on everything from Nashville soccer club players getting paid in crypto to the first female tech founder to raise $1.5 million in 8 hours. That's actually the story that caught my attention as I was scrolling through my LinkedIn feed, and it's how I came to ask Kathryn to be a guest on this very podcast. You'll notice that unlike most business publications, there is no paywall on 10beat because Kathryn believes information should be free, which is a great segue into my first question for you, Kathryn. What inspired you to start 10beat, and how can you offer it to readers for free?
So 10beat, like I said, my whole career has been in news, whether it's been TV news or being a staff reporter. And when I left the traditional newsroom, because as much as I love news, my bank account does not love news, not great pay. I was making $40,000 a year with a master's degree in Nashville.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, just not sustainable. So left news and now work in tech as my 9 to 5, but still writing's my passion and storytelling, as well as connecting. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to start Substack. And for those unfamiliar with Substack, it is an online platform that allows individuals to easily publish their work and send it out to an email list and monetize it if you want to make subscriptions. So you can create a paywall. And it allows you to do that versus you don't have to set up like a whole WordPress website. It just allows you to do that very easily. One of the big things that I've always maintained is that information should be free. We should not hoard information. Knowledge is power. And I think that we should empower the masses. And so 10beat is, like I said, currently a passion project. We have one sponsor, hope to grow those sponsors. But more so, 10beat is an outlet for me, for my passion, and also to really get inside scoop and do in-depth stories on people. A lot of times, traditional news outlets are guilty of covering the same people all the time. It's very political.
I have not noticed that. Just kidding.
What I want to do with 10beat is level that playing field and cover people when they do have stories. I don't want to be I do have the news background. I got my master's from Mizzou in journalism. But
one of the best in the country.
It is.
Nice job.
Gotta love. But I think that right now there's two worlds. There's news world, which is politics, and they play God on who gets covered. But they know how to write, and they're just professional trained journalists on how to make it interesting. And then there's bloggers who don't really know how to identify a headline or break news. And I would say 10beat is kind of trying to take the good from both and combine it and be more entrepreneurial and, meet more people and not be political like news, but the quality of writing, identifying the headline, breaking stories, not just doing like volunteer spotlight, which like some blogs. do, and really making it about the subject matter and not about me. I think that's where a lot of content lacks. Is everybody knows content is king now, whether you're doing videos, podcasts, blogs, whatever, content's king. But I think a lot of people get into it for the wrong reasons. They get into it to promote themselves. Obviously, I'm super flattered that you had me on here, but the whole point was the story was about Dina that caught your eye. It wasn't about Kathryn's brand. Now, thankfully, it came back on 10 Beat and you're like, hey, I really like 10 Beat. But the story,
I love 10 Beat.
I started writing and became got into news because I invest in stories and I care about the subject matter or their business or the issue, not just to say, hey, I want to promote me and my brand. And I feel like in this world of creators, there's a lot of people that they don't actually care about, they just want to promote themselves rather than putting the spotlight on the story, the issue, the guest.
That is so well said. So in thinking about the story, what do you look for in the story?
The best thing I've learned is like from TV news is what's the headline? Nobody wants to read my story, unfortunately, but I always tell people there's two lines of defense. It's a headline and it's a thumbnail image. So the headline is what's new, what's exciting, how can I catch your attention? It needs to be clear, clever, concise. And what is it new? If there's no sense of urgency, there's no reason to, like I said, for example, we could say, we'll take Dina's title. We could say, Tennessee female talks about like her fashion company. Tennessee female talks about fashion company. Doesn't give me urgency. Tennessee founder, 1.5 million, 8 hours. Tennessee founder makes historic raise. Okay. There's this urgency in news. So a lot of like bloggers will take Dina and be like, Dina Medor is a, fashion technologist. Blah. Doesn't give me a sense of urgency. Historic raise, numbers, clear, point blank, clever. Same thing.
To your point also, that image got my attention too. And then I saw the comments about all the way down to the photographer and the creative director on that. And I mean, the image was like super cool and super eye-catching. And it was original, right? It was an original image that she created with her team, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, so they actually are like the perfect people to collaborate with, because I always tell people I want a good thumbnail image. And so when I was interviewing Dina, I was like, I need a good thumbnail image for this story. And like, I don't want just like to take your headshot. And I was like, in theory, I imagine Dina on a pile of clothes, and I was like, this, but I was like, obviously I'm not paying for the image to be made, but I'm like, this is what I think would get people's attention, because I relate to them. Headline to one, line of defense, thumbnails the next. We got to have the like 1-2 punch. And so they were like, okay. And so Danny, who works at Couture, he's like, we'll make it happen. And then they reached out to Igor, the photographer, who was fantastic. He did an amazing job. And I was like, it's like you took my hand and took exactly from my brain, like what I was.
Now that's a good creative right there.
Thinking, because
that's cool. Okay. How long? So what was the time span and all that?
Probably about a week. Probably about a week.
Because I think that's great context too, because a lot of people, especially, if you're like, you broke that story, right? So it's breaking news. I'm doing air quotes for people, the listeners, but it's breaking news. But what a lot of people don't understand is the work that goes on behind a story like that. Like it might be a week or two in the making. If I offer you up an exclusive on a story, then that also gives us a little bit of time to really do it well, right? You're not
that's a really great point.
And then you were able to work with them to make that amazing
to make it
image
what I felt like best it could be. And like that's a great point. Like right now, I have stories planned out for April and May. I know when people can announce things to break the news, but I'm like, okay, this is what we need ahead of time. You need to go get, like, this is what I'm thinking for thumbnail, like make this happen. I need this information so I can have it ready to go. Because a lot of breaking news is like, we're not talking about like a murder or shooting just happening, but these like business news, at least people know when they're going to announce certain things. And that brings me to my point of relationships in reporting of if people, one, trust your integrity and that they can tell you something and you're not going to tell somebody else before they're ready. They will tell you that. And then two, people trusting you with their story, because there's so many people who've had a bad experience with press that they're reluctant to open up or scared. And so I always tell people I'm very humbled when people choose to share that with me, because that's a lot of trust.
Right.
But then in return, I'm like, let me break it. And I promise you, you won't regret it. That I feel like that's really, writing is one thing. I will never say that I'm like the best writer, the most talented writer. But I think the thing that a lot of reporters lack is the relationship building of knowing that, like, hey, I want to have a good relationship with them. I want to be able to plan things out. I want to respect them so that I do get to break that story.
Right. And I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it's gotten harder to have those relationships between media and the company on the other side, or like me, like a PR agency on the other side, because there's not, maybe there's not that trust, or maybe, I don't know, maybe there's not as much energy going into that relationship building, as maybe there once was. I could be wrong. But I think it's also about, I want to get into the notion of like, okay, how should people think about pitching a story to you? And what we talk about on my team is, on the one hand, there's some of the like, just basic things that we do. Okay, if you want to put out a press release and clients want to put out press releases, that's one thing, right? You can put out the press release and this is the story that we're announcing. This is the news we're announcing, but that's very much about, what we want to say rather than what's the real story behind it, right? So to me, it does take time to really think about, well, what would be a really interesting angle on this? What would be something that not only the reporter, but the world would care about and want to read, and then take the time to connect those dots. And I'm just curious, if I'm doing that and I'm pitching you, does it then become a conversation? It's like, oh, okay, that's interesting, or that's interesting, but I'd be more interested if you could bring me something like, X.
So I tell people the first thing you need to come to a reporter with is a headline. You need to know, what is that headline? So how do you identify a headline? Well, that depends on your audience. But for business news, you're thinking, is somebody raising money? Are they, because that's a headline. So-and-so raises $1.5 million, 8 hours. Okay. Is somebody making a C-suite hire? So-and-so takes helm of, Bridgestone. Are they expanding to new markets? So-and-so opened 7 storefronts. Are they, collaborating with another university or local business? Belmont and Fisk partner to do, XYZ. And so thinking your first thing should be like, what's the headline? Because any reporter is going to have a headline to pitch to their editor.
Right.
Or in my case, like, I want people to open it. And if you don't have a headline that has urgency, newness, or why do I care? So think about that first, is the headline. The next thing is think about, why would the average person care? So an example I like to use is, I recently wrote a story on my friend Trinity, who started a motorcycle apparel company for women. Okay. Cool. Happy that she launched that. But I am not a motorcycle rider, and only 20% of women own bikes. So why does the average person care about Trinity's line? Well, I learned, women are 47% more likely to suffer severe injuries in a motorcycle accident because of inadequate protective gear. Because in the industry, when I was doing research, they have a thing called shrink it and pink it, meaning they just take a man's design, it's designed for a man's body, and they shrink it and they make it rose gold.
Shut
okay.
up.
And
Really?
so then if you
Shrink
fall
it
off
and
a
pink it.
Yeah, shrink it and pink it. It's an industry fashion term. I told Trinity about it. I was like, do you know about shrink it and pink it? Um, and so what happens is if it's not designed to mold to your body and you fall off, you're getting no protective gear. And these are all designed for men's bodies. Our bodies are very different. So the whole point is, even though I don't ride motorcycles, it's not something, I'm doing. I'm like, yeah, all these women are getting hurt because they're not like protected. Like they're shrinking it and pinking it. And so I think really finding like, why should I care even if I'm not a motorist? Like, why does the average person care even if they don't ride a motorcycle? That's what I tell people is why, like finding why would the
Get
average
to the
person care?
why.
Yeah. And so, now I'm like, oh no, we need this so that like my friend Trinity doesn't get hurt, on the bike. And so I think that's the next thing is figuring out why would the average person care, whether they ride a motorcycle, whether they're not part of that company, whether they, work in fashion or, don't work in fashion. Before Dina's story, I thought that when I ordered 5 dresses from Nordstrom and only planned to keep one and return 4, that those 4 just went to a warehouse or back to Nordstrom. And then I learned that those probably actually went to a landfill or were burned because it costs companies more money to reintegrate returns into their supply chains than it does for them to burn it or toss it in a landfill. And I'm like, what? That we don't think about that.
That makes no sense.
And it all comes down to the almighty dollar. And so it's cheaper for them. And so how do we mitigate returns? Well, it's all about finding the right fit. That's why I ordered 5 dresses because I'm like, I don't know which ones, and right now all the fit technology is just being like, take measurements of yourself. It doesn't factor in how does spandex cling to you versus denim versus polyester versus silk. It doesn't take into effect the pattern of each individual item. It's just saying, if these are your measurements, here's a generic thing, size guide. So I think
I had this whole conversation recently. I was going to the beach, and so I needed a new suit, and I go to the swimsuit store, and the one suit that I really wanted, they had a size too big and a size too small, but not the actual size I needed. And I'm like, do these just come in half sizes? Because I always run into this all the time. And the lady at the store, she's like, nope, that's, it just would cost too much to make these incremental sizes that actually fit you right.
Yeah, no, it's crazy, especially in like women's line. But so, yeah, first thing would be identify the headline. Second thing, why does the average person care? And third thing is humanize. And I think this is the thing that a lot of business reporters forget to do is we'll just be so focused on so-and-so raised however much money, they're going to mature their software with it and hire 5 people. This is the people who invested, end of story. And it's a little cold and it doesn't feel human. ChatGPT can put that together.
Right.
Versus, one of the things I love the most about reporting is getting to really know people. So like in Dina's case, I asked her and she was raising on International Women's Day. I'm like, well, was your mom an entrepreneur? And she was like, no. My mom was a cop. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was like, my mom was actually the first female, sheriff's deputy in Macon County. And I was like, no way. I was like, that is so cool. And she was like, yeah, before that, she spent 40 years in the military. And so in that moment, I was like, Dina, do you realize like your mom was like a Rosie the Riveter, a pioneer of her time? And you're breaking into a male dominated industry. It's different than your mom's, but it's like following, the footsteps of that. You guys are both breaking barriers for women. And she was like, I've never thought about it like that. And I had another story with my friend Camille. She is a Latina founder, and she received funding from Google for it was a Latina Founders Fund initiative to help minority businesses. And, when I was talking to her, I said, well, was anybody in your family an entrepreneur? Like, why did you want to be an entrepreneur? And she was like, oh, my grandmother was an entrepreneur. She was like, she immigrated from Mexico to Chicago and used to sell tacos on the street corner, but was then like harassed by, police, et cetera. And I said, well, let's think about it this way. So your grandmother, came here how many years ago, and she couldn't run her business because she was harassed, by police selling her tacos. And I said, and now her granddaughter just received funding from one of the largest tech companies in the world. And she was like, oh, I have chills. And I was like, but it's true. But those are the things that you really have to get to know people, like to know Camille's abuela and to know that, she was selling her, chicken tacos on the street corner and she was being harassed in Chicago, and knowing that but those are the questions that humanize the story and make people, sometimes even the founders don't realize. I'm like, have you let's put this in perspective.
They're too
and I
close
think
to it, right? They've never thought of it that way, to your point.
And I think, and that's not a question that, sometimes, it's in Dina's case asking, oh, is your mom? She's like, no, she's a sheriff's deputy. And then her saying, oh, she's the first sheriff's deputy. I'm like, okay, look, you're both breaking barriers. So I think some of those just have to be conversations,
right?
And you have to invest the time to really
That's
know
where
about.
I was about to go. It takes time, right? And so much of what we see in the news or online or in social these days, it's just, just throw it out there. And let's not even actually have a conversation with anybody. And let's just make up some, what we think the story is. We don't actually know what it is. And, there's so much disinformation that gets out there, but it really is taking the time. Is that also sort of part of what inspired you, is with 10 Beat and self-publishing, you can do it in your own way, on your own time,
on timeline.
Take the time you want to take to get
and
the
do
story
it
you want to
my
get.
way. And that was something, as much as I love being a reporter, one, I have full control over what stories I do now. Amazing. I don't have to go pitch them to an editor. I am editor in chief.
I love that.
I also I take my stories very seriously. This is going to come off crazy. They're my babies. If I'm going to put my name on something, I want it to be good. Mm-hmm. I don't want to churn and burn and rewrite press releases. That's not what I want to be known for. And when you work in traditional TV news or regular news, it's like, hey, you've got to turn stories daily. Mm-hmm. And
some of them might be good and some of them might not be any good.
And part of that is sometimes you can't get all the sources you need that day, or sometimes people don't have the time to give you, your subject doesn't have the time to spend, Dina and I sat down for an hour. Well, if I just would have randomly called Dina on a day and said, hey, she might have not had an hour of time to give me. Mm-hmm. Or I might not have had, I'm like, no, I got to get this out by, 3:00 on this blast. And so I've set a personal goal with 10 Beat to do one story a week, or I'll do 2 stories one week. And then, depending on timelines of breaking news, but anything I do, I really I believe that whoever my source is, they are giving me a great gift of letting me tell their story. And I want to do it the best way possible for them and for me. Kathryn Rickmeyer does not want her name on something that I'm not super proud of. I want my quality of work to speak to that, because I'll tell people, I'm like, yeah, I want everybody to get all the press they can get, because I'm going to tell their story differently than somebody else is going to tell their story. Mm-hmm. But I know I'm like, nobody is going to invest more time in you than I am going to. That I might not be the best writer, I may not be, but I genuinely care about everybody who I collaborate with and like to forge that relationship. And I think that's what it's all about, is taking the time rather than just slapping stuff out there. Because again, mm-hmm. I think what made Dina's story cool, I mean, yes, it was a historic raise, but really humanizing to be like, wow, her mom, and knowing that's one of the most conservative counties in Tennessee, and her mom was, doing that. That's what made it unique and interesting. And then talking to the investors mm-hmm. that day who were like, yeah, it really is about Dina. We were in because of her. She could have started a taco truck.
So many investors say, it's they're investing in the founder, because that founder, they have a great story and they're able to tell that story, and they know that person is going to be successful.
Yeah. And I think that that's, the real magic behind it. And like you said, you hit the nail on the head. It's really investing the time. And fortunately, I don't get to write as many stories because I'm not full time with this, but I would rather take my time on the stories that I do and put out quality rather than quantity.
That's so cool. And so how do you promote your stories? How do you get people's eyes on those stories? Is it mostly LinkedIn?
So I have a subscriber list so people can subscribe and it comes straight to your email.
I did just do that, and it did come to my email. And now I've been just going back and reading all your past content. It's awesome.
Thank you so much. But so you can do it that way. And then I really promote on LinkedIn. That's where my audience is, just because my articles are more business articles. So that's really my target demographic. And that's my take. So I always share them on LinkedIn. You should follow the 10 Beat page. We're trying to get followers on the 10 Beat page, but I also share them on my personal LinkedIn page to promote that. So yeah, that's how I do it. And it's been really rewarding. And I tell people writing is what makes me happiest. It's a creative outlet. It's a connectivity outlet. I love to connect with all different people. You get to learn about things that you would have no business learning about.
Right.
And it forces you to learn about things that you may not. Like the other week, I wrote a story about shipping containers being moved. Going to be honest, I've never cared to look up about how shipping containers are moved. Okay. Well, then after I do this story about this guy raising money, I'm like, let me just tell you about like the shipping container problem. Like I'm
so
all
fascinating.
invested. It is my newfound like passion.
Right. And even see, I mean, you make a great point with this. There's always a cool story behind anything.
It's just sitting down and taking the time to figure out what makes it cool, why it matters. And like I said, that was something I would have never sought that out. I would have never been like, I'm going to research shipping containers and learn about this whole thing. And honestly, when I made the connection to the person, I was like, okay, yeah, we'll do it. Like, you've got a headline for sure. But I had so much fun with it. And I'm like, there's more to empty containers than you think. So I think that's the other thing, is it forces you to learn about things that you wouldn't normally think that you care about.
Right. Yeah. One of our values at my agency is be curious. And I'm like, listen, asking questions is a sign of strength, and curiosity will get you everywhere. I'm a firm believer in that. And you know, it's just fun. It makes life fun, and you learn about people and you learn about things, and you never know where it's going to take you.
No, I think you're right. It's the insatiable curiosity. So,
yes. So I got a couple of sort of burning questions before we have to sign off.
Oh, man.
One, I'm always curious, what was your first job? Was it as a reporter? And then,
no,
and what did
I was
you
a lifeguard
from it? You were what?
I was a lifeguard when I was 15. My sister drove me to the pool that I worked at because I wasn't old enough to drive. And
are you from Missouri?
No. I'm actually from Huntsville, Alabama.
Okay, got it.
I learned from that job that I definitely need SPF 40 or above and a sun shirt, because I am, people could see right now, as white as a ghost, and everybody else would have a great tan, and I'm over there with zinc oxide all over the place.
So what? Okay, well, that does lead me to another question, though. Like, so when did you discover you were interested in journalism and being a reporter?
So this is actually kind of a funny story. I call it the Elle Woods of journalism story. So when I was in college, my undergraduate degree is in finance, and I was interning for a commercial real estate broker because I thought like, oh, I might want to do that. And they were paying $15 an hour. So I was like, great college job. While I was working there, there was a broker that he was friends with that was at another firm, who was young, like in his early 20s. And he wrote op-eds for AL.com, which was like our Tennessean. And so I come into my boss's office one day and I said, I'm going to write an op-ed and I'm going to email it to James, and he's going to redline it, and he's going to ask me to coffee or drinks, and we're going to like fall in love and get married. My boss was like, what? He was like, Kathryn, no. Like, I'm just going to text him right now. You're a cute girl. He'll go out with you. And I was like, no, no, no. This is like what's going to, like, this is how we're going to like fall in love and get together.
This was your love story.
So that did not happen. 2 days later, I came into my boss's office, bawling, crying, and he was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? Did somebody die? And I said, James thinks I'm stupid. And he goes, what? And I was like, yeah, this is what he sent me back. Like when I sent him, my boss was like, let me see what you wrote. And so he read, he goes, I think what you wrote is great. It's way better than anything I've ever read of his. And we're not changing a word. We're going to submit it as is. And so he sent it in and submitted it for me. And AL.com picked it up and they ran it. It got over 10,000 shares online.
Oh my gosh.
It made it in the printed paper. It was on the front page of the printed paper on Sunday.
Way.
Yeah. And
nice.
I was like, I really like this. And then so I just started writing like op-eds for AL.com and then started writing for Alabama Center for Real Estate. When I finished my degree, I, still got the finance degree, but when I finished my degree, I knew that I wanted to work in news and then had a friend working at the local TV news station. And that's how I, got into that. And then I got my master's degree while I was working in TV news. It was a hybrid program. So I only had to go to Columbia twice a semester, once for a midterm, once for a final, and the rest I did online. But that's kind of how it happened. So all because I wanted to impress a boy. And then
that's a great story. Who turned out to be the smart one in that?
Yeah, no. Well, so James did try to go out with me after that. And I was like, oh, no, I'm too good for you. But yeah, it was kind of crazy. That is how I, went about it. And again, I do not recommend somebody like, I don't know why I thought that was just like, this is how I'm going to get somebody to ask me out. But so glad that that is what I did because it led me to where I am now.
That's very cool. I love it. Okay. Can I ask you one more burning question?
Yes.
So aside from James, if you could go to dinner with anyone.
Oh, James, I would not even go to Sonic. With you.
All right. Forget James. If you could go to dinner with anyone, who would it be? And what's the one question you would ask?
Are they dead or are they alive?
They can be either.
Oh man, that is a tough one. I would go out with, that's super hard.
It is a hard one.
It's so hard.
I feel like anytime I'm ever asked that question, my answer could change from day to day.
It could change from day to day for me. But if it was just today, I would probably go to dinner with Michelle Obama. That's probably who I would go.
Oh, nice. What would you ask her?
I would say
probably a million questions, but
I would say like, how did you do it? She has so much strength. I don't know if anybody out there has read like Becoming, and she
only millions of people.
Only millions. But Barack like is so impressive and obviously a big Obama fan. But I'm like, actually, Michelle's the better half. And, would love for her to run. I know she's not going to, but she really held it together and like really propped him up and like focused. And like, she is somebody who is so extraordinary on her own. I would, like ask, like, how did you, how did you do that? How did you get there? And I think she has such poise.
Oh my gosh, so much poise, so much
poise.
And
she class.
Just speaks she's so honest, right?
Genuine.
And she always seems to know the right thing to say. That would be a really fun dinner.
I just love her. I'm a big fan. And like I said, not to knock Barack, because totally love him, but I'm like, she is a force. And if she ever ran, I would be knocking doors for her in Tennessee.
Okay. That does lead me to one question though. Okay. Cause I started thinking, hey, maybe you could write a story about Michelle somehow. But you're really just focused on Tennessee. That's your focus right now.
Tennessee. That is my focus right now. It is 10 beats. I didn't want to just do Nashville. Now, granted, most of my stories are Nashville, but I would love anybody out there in Tennessee. I don't care if you're in Knoxville, Chattanooga, Cookeville, like wherever you're at, because I think that I really like to meet people in person. Everybody I've interviewed so far, I have met in person
You're
since doing
kidding.
10 beat. Yeah. No, we've done all of it in person.
That's remarkable.
So that is one thing I like. And since I started 10 beat, every person who's been on there has been interviewed in person. And so really out of state, unless, Michelle wants to fly me, which I'm okay with, I would pay to go. I would pay if Michelle invited me.
Right?
But
Me too.
yeah, no, I think local news matters. And I've always thought that from when I started in TV news. The way I look at it is what somebody tweeted or did is really not impacting my life as much as the street light being put in, near my school, or what's happening in the state legislature, or you can change things at a local level. And I think sometimes we get so invested in all this like national stuff. And I'm like, local news, local politics matters. Tennessee, not doing so great right now.
So true.
But that's a prime example of like the craziness that's going on here right now. And it's like, we should be focused on that because this is like directly impacts us versus, I don't really know what's happening, what's happening in Congress right now. Like if it's going to affect us, it's not going to affect us for a while, but like, this is real deal. Women in Tennessee, if you're raped, incest, there's no exception to abortion. Probably not going to be one. And, especially for the LGBTQ community, not a safe, supportive community. And so that's all happening in the state and on a local level, statewide level. And so I feel like there's a real need for people to, excuse my language, about what's happening in their own backyard.
It's so true. And I used to cover politics way back in the day. And, there's a saying, all politics is local, because it is true. That's just the truth. And I think hopefully people are beginning to get a lot more involved and paying more attention on the local level because of some of the things you're talking about, some of the things that have been happening. I think media, just because of the state of the industry and then, people paying attention, we've kind of taken our eye off the ball a little bit, how things are going on around us and how things are happening. You're like, wait, how did this happen? But you're so right. So I love what you're doing. I love you're focused here at home. I'm glad you're here, and I'm so glad to know about 10 Beat. I'm going to be following you, and
thank you so much for having me. And
this has been awesome. I've loved every minute of it.
Yeah, I'm so humbled, and thank you so much. And it's also nice to talk to like a former reporter and a PR expert who gets it from both sides, and a fellow Tennessean. It's really important. And I think stories are meant to be told and meant to be shared and be taken with a lot of care.
Absolutely. I agree. Before we sign off, will you please share with listeners where can they find 10 Beat and how can they get in touch with you?
10beat.com. It's TENN beat, BEAT, just like it sounds. 10beat.com. So you can subscribe. It's free to subscribe. Expect one story a week. And you can also follow 10 Beat on LinkedIn, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also always posting about that. And then if you have a story idea, shoot me an email. And it is just my first and last name, Kathryn Rickmeyer @gmail.com.
Awesome. We're going to include all of this in our show notes. And when we publish this, we'll have links to everything. So to make it easy for people. So thank you very much. That wraps up this episode of How It's Done. My guest today has been Kathryn Rickmeyer, journalist and founder of the online statewide news outlet 10 Beat, which again, you can read for free at TENNBEAT.com. Thank you so much, Kathryn. I've loved having you on the show.
Thank you.
That's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. We're looking forward to keeping great conversations coming your way as we grow this podcast. There's even more great content from our conversations on our blog. Be sure to check it out at growwithfuoco.com. That's grow with Fuoco, FUOCO.com. Stay tuned until next time, and no matter what, stay curious.